Oh, I see that message is to you, Cole, Microsoft Word.
Message? Oh, okay. I was trying to bring up those links, but I guess it didn't work. Oops. Okay, let's get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We may be joined by a few more. I'm Cole Harrison, Executive Director of Mass Peace Action, and we're here to talk about state legislation, how we can use state legislation to push for peace and justice issues. Mass Peace Action, together with our partner groups, have filed 6 bills in this session of the legislature, and we also are going to talk about 2 bills that we oppose. So we're going to cover 8 bills in all today and tell you about them. Going to hear from legislators and advocates about why they're important and what they would mean if they were to pass. To mention a couple of the things, we have a sign-up form we request you fill to say what you can do for these bills. You can think about it during the session, but I'll put in the link now. That asks you to tell us what bills are most important to you and what you can do for them. It gives you a few options of ways you can help out. Second, we have a lobby day, tentatively May 23rd, on the nuclear bills. 3 of the bills are about pertaining to nuclear weapons issues, and we're going to do a lobby day on May 23rd. So please sign up for that. Finally, there's other bills we support besides the ones we filed ourselves on issues ranging from immigration to economic issues, prison and criminal justice issues, and more, climate issues. So we have a list of those. We're not going to talk about those bills in any detail today, but I want to give you a link to them. And we will come back to those in our email messaging as they come up for action in the legislature. Gee, our first speaker is not here yet, but I'm still going to pass it over to, maybe Jonathan's calling the person. I'm going to wait just a second till Jonathan gets off the phone and see if he has word. Otherwise, we'll go to the speakers that are here and let them go first. Hey, Jonathan, any word from Senator Pacheco?
He doesn't answer his phone, so.
All right. Well, maybe you can keep trying, and why don't we go forward with the speakers that are already here, unless you want to make some preliminary remarks now. All right. So why don't we go over to Glenn, and you can introduce the speakers on the nuclear segment.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Glenn Cody. I'm co-chair of the Massachusetts Peace Action Legislative Political Committee, and I'll be moderating the section we have on this event about bills in the state legislature that deal with nuclear issues. And so we have on deck Ira Helfand, Lindsay Sabadosa, Mike Connolly, and Tim and Wallace. And is Ira here? I believe I did see him.
Ira's here, yes.
Yes, awesome. So first up, we have Ira Helfand, who joins us now to discuss the Back from the Brink campaign and the resolution bill that I believe is in the Senate. And take it away, Ira.
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, so the Back from the Brink bill in the current legislative session is S1487. It's a Senate-only bill at this point because it's a resolution, and the kind of resolution that it is, it can only be considered by the House if it's first passed by the Senate. So the focus initially will be trying to get the Senate to pass this. It is referred to a joint House-Senate committee, which is interesting. And currently it is sitting before the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security, although there is an attempt being made to move it to the Emergency Preparedness Committee, which only has 10 or so pieces of legislation before it, as opposed to the 300 odd pieces before the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee. This is part of a national campaign of similar resolutions that have been passed now by municipal city councils, town meetings in about 65 cities and towns across the country. We've also had similar resolutions adopted by 7 state legislative bodies, both houses of the Oregon and California legislature, the Maine Senate, the Rhode Island Senate, and the New Jersey Assembly. There is a bill under consideration in the Rhode Island House, which we expect to pass in this session as well. Right now, as you all know, we are in an extremely desperate situation with regards to the possible danger of nuclear war. Before Ukraine, the experts were saying this was the worst moment we've been in since the Cold War, possibly worse. And then the Russians invaded Ukraine and have made just a torrent of nuclear threats since then. And it's really important that we build a movement in this country to counter that. The Back from the Brink campaign calls on the United States essentially to stop its opposition to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, to embrace the treaty and support it, to recognize that this is a powerful, important, positive contribution to the effort to eliminate nuclear weapons, and to take the step necessary for the United States to advance the treaty process, which is to convene negotiations among all 9 of the nuclear armed states for a verifiable, enforceable, time-bound agreement to eliminate their arsenals. As ICANN has called in several statements which is issued so far this year, this is the critical next step that needs to happen in the path towards nuclear abolition. And we are very grateful for ICANN's international support for this position that is the heart of the Back from the Brink campaign. Back from the Brink also calls on the United States to take some immediate intermediate steps that would lessen the danger of nuclear war while negotiations proceed, and would give momentum, positive momentum to this process, specifically for the U.S. to take its weapons off hair-trigger alert, to adopt a no first use policy, to end the policy whereby the President of the United States can launch nuclear war without anybody else intervening in the process, and to cancel the plan to spend about $1.7 trillion modernizing and enhancing every aspect of the nuclear arsenal. So I think that it would be enormously important if we could get the Massachusetts legislature to join the 20-odd municipalities in the state that have already endorsed this campaign. And it would help to build the kind of movement that we need to change U.S. nuclear policy.
Thank you so much. Our first speaker has come back, Jonathan.
All right. So thank you, Ira. Thank you, Glenn. It's an honor here to be able to welcome to Mass Peace Action Senator Marc Pacheco, the Senate's longest continuously serving member, and thus the Dean of the Massachusetts Senate. Started his legislature career elected to the Taunton School Committee in 1980, and then was later elected to the House in 1988, and to the Senate from First Plymouth and Bristol 1992. Besides, serving and chairing on many committees, joint committees in the legislature, he's actually also active outside the state in the Council of State Governments, sits on the National Conference of State Legislatures Task Force on Energy Supply. I personally became aware of his efforts in the legislature 2006, 2013, when he was the chief sponsor of the legislation to raise the then minimum wage.
And that's all you had to do.
To more than 300,000 workers in the Commonwealth. And throughout his career, he's supported initiatives to spur job creation, economic growth, preserve the environment, ensure protection of rights of veterans and citizens. Also very proud of his work on the Global Warming Solutions Act. And he will say a few words about some valuable but perhaps buried history of Massachusetts legislative initiatives. Senator Pacheco, you're with us, please.
You have to unmute, Senator.
Unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm just unfortunately coming from a funeral and outside of a reception that I need to get into, so I won't have that long, but I do want to address some of the issues relative to organizing and working on some of these issues that you are all talking about. I was asked to come on and talk a little bit about some of the strategies that were used over the years, and in particular, a couple that I personally was involved with, whether you look at the whole effort that we worked on along with Byron Rushing in Boston when he was in the legislature around South Africa and apartheid, or you look at the work that we did along with Antonio Cabral from New Bedford and myself working on East Timor and the right of self-determination in that country. Ramos Horta, the Nobel Prize winner, is now the president of East Timor. He was the foreign minister in exile in my office many a day, having Dunkin' Donuts coffee and planning and organizing as to how we would get the need for a self-determination vote on the UN agenda and on the then it was the Clinton administration agenda to get that action taken care of. And we did that through legislation. We organized around legislation, getting the idea out there, not so much to pass the bill, but to ensure that we were having an organizing tool that could bring the issue to the general public and have committee meetings and committee hearings that could bring what was taking place every day in East Timor to the public forefront. So we did that. Whether you go back to issues like tobacco, legislation and those types of things that we had worked on, and what we're working on now on the state level is the whole divestment issue, divesting from fossil fuels. So working on whether it's human rights issues, civil rights issues, public health issues, national security issues, that there are mechanisms in place that have worked successfully to get on the national agenda, especially when you're working in concert with other jurisdictions in the U.S. and other jurisdictions internationally. For example, when we were working on East Timor, because of the relationship with Portugal and East Timor being a Portuguese-speaking country as well, we worked with a lot of the Portuguese-speaking countries in the world dealing with the same issue, and we eventually got the UN to take a position in favor of self-determination. It wasn't too long after that the Clinton administration ended up supporting it, and then lo and behold, Indonesia finally backed off and allowed a self-determination vote. So, that's what I have to say, that this is all about organizing the hard work that you are all involved with. I was pleased to be involved with those issues. There are so many more things that need to be done in the middle of a war in Ukraine. The issues there are quite complex and disheartening to see what is happening to the Ukrainian people. The work that needs to be done there is at multiple levels. But I wanted to just say thank you for asking me to say a few words, and
thank you for joining us, and we look
Thanks,
forward
sir.
to working together. As these issues move through the legislature. Thanks again. And
Thank you very much. And I guess Carol Doherty wanted me to tell you that she will be joining you. She is just coming from another event, and we'll be signing on. So
thank you.
all right. Thank you. Bye now.
Glenn, back to you.
Yes, I believe we now have Lindsay Sabadosa here. Is she here?
I am indeed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have Representative Lindsay Sabadosa here to discuss the Nuclear and Climate Commission bills. So, Rep. Sabadosa, please take it away.
Thank you. Well, I think I'm the opposite of Senator Pacheco today. I'm far less formal, but I think I'm in more appropriate Earth Day attire, and luckily I'm not attending a funeral this afternoon. But it is a pleasure to be here with you to discuss this legislation. I know that Timon is here as well, and he can probably speak much more about this, but I'll give a little brief overview of where we are in the State House with the bill. So this session, it is H738, and it is an act providing for an investigation and study by a special commission relative to the existential threat posed by nuclear weapons and climate change to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I will not be testing you on that afterwards, so if you didn't get the whole title, that's fine. I think we can just all call it the Special Commission Bill and be done with that. Most legislators are familiar with it now, thanks to the very good work of many members of this group. I was scrolling through the names, and I see people who have worked very hard to make sure legislators know about this. So this session, as you might have gathered from the title, there is more of a focus on the climate change aspect as well. This was done very strategically to try to give the bill a little bit more legs, to try to tie it into different issues. If you've attended any of the hearings and heard some of the testimony, that's always sort of been an undercurrent of the legislation that, we should, the whole, I'm going to get it incorrectly now, but warheads to windmills, that we should be focusing not on production of weapons, but production of technology that will move us towards solving the climate crisis. Again, tying into these Earth Day themes here. The bill this time has gone to the Committee on Emergency Preparedness, which I think Ira rightly said is a nice committee, I think, for this. There's a very, probably a more friendly chair this session, and the bill does have fewer committees, so we have a little bit more of the attention of the chairs. That's not to say that we didn't do well last session. We got the bill all the way to House Ways and Means, which is really a tremendous feat. Of course, we didn't get it over the finish line, but I'm hoping that with the connection to climate change, we can move the bill forward like we did last session, but perhaps also be a little more successful in trying to tie it in with other pieces of legislation that are moving forward. So, for example, another climate bill, another bill that has anything to do with investments in climate, so maybe even something around economic development. So that's the strategy for this session. We are a little light on co-sponsors starting out, although I think everyone was inundated with emails in the first few weeks, and now with House budget, it is challenging to get people to pay attention, but luckily we still have the same rule where people can co-sponsor at any point. So I know after House budget, and probably a little bit during the next few days, then we're on the floor a lot. My goal is to chat a little more with people, make sure it's on their radar, that they understand that the bill has been refiled, what the new twist is, and to try to gain some more support. But I'll also say number of co-sponsors, as you probably all know, does not make or break a bill. We got that bill to move forward last session, even without having 80 co-sponsors, and often bills with 80 co-sponsors don't go anywhere. So it's really about talking to the right people who can help us move it forward, and that is my goal, and I look forward to working with many of you again to do that. So thank you for having me, and as always, happy to answer any questions, although I know you have a great roundup of speakers today.
All right, thank you so much. We do have, if we have time, we should have a few minutes for questions, assuming we can keep on track, but we do have one speaker who does have to leave at 3, so we'll make sure there's plenty of time for that. Representative Mike Connolly, is Representative Mike Connolly here? Yes, hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and a Yeti microphone. Oh, I have the same, is that a Yeti?
Yeah,
I have the same one.
This was my Christmas gift to myself. Am I sounding good out there or what? I don't know.
That is sound like a fully legit radio host right now. So good to go.
Yeah, well, we're coming to you live from the People's Republic of Cambridge here. And it's great to see Rep. Sabadosa and Rep. Doherty. It's good to see my constituent, Jonathan King, who lives about 100 yards to my left. Yeah, thank you, Glenn, for hosting us here. And it's good to see Cole. We were in downtown Crossing last week for Tax Day, heard some great music and some great speeches. And yeah, I'm here to say a few words about our legislation and act relative to the divestment of state pension funds from nuclear weapons. It sounded like Senator Pacheco talked a little bit about history in Massachusetts, and certainly we have been a true leader on this concept and on this tactic of divestment. You know, and I'm thinking about how in 1997, Governor Dukakis sort of started an effort in the 90s that sort of came to fruition in 1997 to divest our state pension funds from tobacco. We just recently celebrated the life of the great representative and community leader Mel King, and we know that one of Mel King's biggest accomplishments really was the push for divestment from South Africa, which he initiated in the 1970s in the state legislature. I think it took all the way until '82 to accomplish that. So we shouldn't get discouraged. You know, these things do take time to finally build consensus. I was at both the wake and the funeral for Mel, and one of the things we heard at the wake was that Nelson Mandela, in deciding to come to Boston, was really thinking about Mel King and the leadership he showed in the legislature to initiate the divestment from the apartheid regime. So it really comes full circle. Our legislature's also taken steps to divest from the Sudanese government and the atrocities that they were responsible in Darfur. And of course, Northern Ireland, there was a divestment package signed by Governor Dukakis back in 1983 that targeted businesses that supplied military hardware in Northern Ireland. So there's a lot of different aspects to this notion of divestment. And really, I think we need to bring this tactic and this concept to bear against the existential threat of nuclear weapons. You know, Rep. Sabadosa mentioned it's Earth Day. And so I don't know if I missed the beginning. I don't know if we intentionally planned this on Earth Day or not, but it's so relevant that we are talking about this on Earth Day. There's a great deal of sort of pure environmental climate advocacy that happens on this day, as well it should, but really there are two existential threats that we face: climate change and nuclear annihilation. And when we think about the ongoing war in Ukraine, and when we think about some of the provocations on either side, you know, we are reminded that doomsday clock has now been moved closer to midnight than any time that I can remember. And so I'm really hopeful that we can really build some focus in the legislature this term on our entire peace agenda, especially this divestment bill. It's House Bill 2480. Senator Jamie Eldridge has filed a Senate version, that's Senate Bill 1651. Right now we have several co-sponsors, including some of the representatives here in the room with us, so thank you for that. And I guess I'll leave it there, and happy to answer any questions. And, you know, just want to reiterate again that, you know, I think we really need to divest and move away from, you know, this nuclear predicament that we find ourselves in, because, you know, we're not going to go forever without some sort of mistake, without some sort of misunderstanding, without some sort of provocation. You know, as far as I'm concerned, the chances of us going on indefinitely in the status quo is zero. So we have to step back from the brink and move away from this nuclear posture around the world as soon as possible. So thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Speaking of back from the brink, Ira is stepping out of the call, but he did leave his email in the chat for anyone else that wants to get involved with his campaign for back for the brink to stop this horrible sense of nuclear annihilation. And Timon is up next. And I see he is in the room. Hopefully he can be pinned to. Yes, hello. Timon Wallace is Executive Director of Nuclear Ban US, based in lovely Northampton, and has been working across the state to build support for anti-nuclear weapon bills since they were first introduced in 2019. And he joins us now to discuss mobilizing in support for these bills. So thank you, Timon.
Thank you, Glenn. And thank you, Mike Connolly and Ira Helfand and Lindsay Sabadosa. We're very excited to be working towards these bills. I think all of us care about all the issues that are in the State House, but we're working especially on the nuclear bills, and as Mike said, linking it with Earth Day and with the climate. So I just wanted to run down a little bit of our strategy and things that are coming up to try to build support for these bills. Lindsay mentioned 738, which is the House version of the Nuclear and Climate Commission bill. There is a Senate version as well, but we are currently putting our efforts into getting the back from the brink resolution passed in the Senate. As you heard from Ira, it's only in the Senate and not in the House, and so we're concentrating our efforts there. We already have a majority of 43 out of 80 senators who support the commission bill last time, so we know we have the support there. But we want to get the back from the brink bill passed, and that needs support from around the state. The House bill, so that the Senate bill for back from the brink, just to remind you, is 1487 S 1487. The House bill H738 for a commission is, as was mentioned, currently in the Emergency Preparedness Committee, which Senator Pacheco is one of the chairs of. So we're hoping that he will support getting that out of committee again, as it was last time in the other committee. But we need co-sponsors. We need Mike Connolly back on board as a co-sponsor, along with others that had co-sponsored it last time. And we need to build support around the state for these bills. We have a webinar coming up on May 7th, which is about the Warheads to Windmills campaign nationally, but it's also going to focus on the state commission, and we've got a breakout room about that. And so anybody who is interested in more about the state commission should join that. We have a lobby day at the State House on May 23rd for all these bills, and we'll be going door to door to get co-sponsors and get pledges of support for these bills on May 23rd. And we're already organizing carloads from Western Mass to come out to Boston. So I hope you can make it even more representative from the Boston area. And we've got a follow-up webinar in June, on June 24th, looking at the warheads to windmills in more detail, looking at these links between the climate crisis and the nuclear weapons crisis, and how we can and have to address both of them. And the divestment that Mike Connolly was talking about is so important. I mean, that's ultimately what we all want to see, is the state divesting from nuclear weapons and from fossil fuels, and leading the way in this direction. And the only rationale for the commission bill originally was that we don't see any evidence that the State House is ready for these things yet, and so it's kind of a no-brainer to set up a committee and look into it and come back with some recommendations, which we thought would be a no-brainer, but even that's been hard work. So we do have groups all around the state. We're setting up a Warheads to Windmills coalition, which already includes 350 Mass and Climate Action Now and some other climate groups, as well as local peace organizations, and of course MAPA and various other affiliates, to try to build support for these bills. And we have a strategy we were hearing some of the history of these issues, and back in the 80s, Governor Dukakis set up a governor's advisory committee on the impact of the nuclear arms race on the state of Massachusetts. And so if the governor can just set that up on their own, we are hoping we can maybe convince Governor Healy to do that. So that's part of our strategy. And we've talked to Senator Comerford about this, who has put the bill in the Senate. And she's very willing to take this to the governor as soon as we have what she feels is enough support around the state for it. So our first priority is building this coalition and building a real solid basis of support. We have letters that people can write to try to get their own reps and senators to co-sponsor and sign on to these bills. And MAPA will be doing a lot more, I know, to mobilize people who support MAPA around the state. I mean, we have a lot of people, and not just directly members, but churches and synagogues and other faith communities and local groups, progressive Democrats, indivisible groups. We've got to mobilize these people to get support for the State House to do these, to pass these bills. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And we also have, so just as a reminder, if people look in the chat, we have the May 7th webinar on warheads to windmills, and tentative date for our lobby day for these anti-nuclear weapon bills on Tuesday, May 23rd. So be sure to sign up for that, and you'll get more information from MAPA along the way. So that, and we still have some time for questions. We have at least a few minutes for any questions that may come up. We have, so if anyone, I don't think Ira is here anymore to talk about Back from the Brink, but we do have questions that if anyone has for the Nuclear Climate Commission with Lindsay Sabadosa, or nuclear divestment with Mike Connolly, or just building support and mobilizing support with our good old friend Timon.
I do saw some questions, Glenn, in the chat pop up as people were talking. There might be some there.
Oh, I'm not sure I see them, but Alec, if you see them, can you let me know what they are?
Sorry, that was my bad. I didn't realize those were coming from the speakers themselves. Apologies.
Oh, okay.
But people can definitely put them in the chat, right, if they want to ask questions or raise their hand.
Yes.
I don't know if I got spotlighted here or what.
Yeah, someone spotlighted you. I wasn't honestly sure how that happened, but I was like, oh, Mike's back. Way to go.
I don't know how to undo it. How do we undo it?
Neither do I, but us.
You're looking good, don't worry.
Community organizing on Zoom is a dynamic event, to put it mildly. Someone mentioned the conflict of interest travel loophole bill.
That's coming up.
That's the next section. So
that's the next section.
Come to that.
Kathleen Hamill mentions the special commission in the House bill and the special commission bill in the Senate. I guess if we don't have any more specific questions, we could just give it over to Alec to mention the bills that MAPA opposes. Cole, do you think that's a good idea?
No, why don't we go to Jonathan with the peace economy section?
Erika, oh yes, that's a good idea.
Erika isn't here yet, but we can start with Jeff, and hopefully Erika will get here. She was promised for 2:45.
Excuse me, I have one question.
Yes.
And this would be for Timon. Timon, just very briefly, could you give us the highlights of what would be new in the weapons to windmills report that you're working on?
What will be new in the report?
Well, what I meant is 3 years ago or so, when your first one came out, you're updating, was my understanding, not just reissuing.
Yeah.
And are there any quick highlights that you could let us know about?
Well, the quick highlights are that COVID happened right after our last report, and that dropped global carbon emissions, which was great for the climate. But then they immediately jumped back again, and they're worse than ever. And as several people have already mentioned, the Ukraine war has not only raised the specter of nuclear war more than it's been in our lifetimes, but it's also made the climate crisis considerably worse because of the boycott of Russian gas, the explosion of the pipeline, and all these things. So that's bad. And the nuclear program is going full speed ahead. I mean, we've never seen anything like the military budget that is now before Congress, and has been going up and up and up, astronomically, approaching $1 trillion a year now, with all the other bits and pieces added to it. So, the situation is not getting better, and the need for addressing these two existential threats has never been greater. We have to do this. And with the, we analyzed the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill that have passed in the previous Congress, and there are important steps, forward in terms of, more tax credits for solar panels and electric vehicles and so on, but it's not nearly enough. And as you probably saw yesterday, or the day before, Senator Marc and AOC relaunched their Green New Deal bill, because we don't have enough. We need to work with these other countries, especially Russia and China, and we need to put it's a moonshot effort that we have to put in to get to save this planet from climate catastrophe. And the fact that nuclear weapons are an even greater immediate danger, and we could use that money and all those skills and technicians and scientists and engineers to put that towards the climate effort. Not to mention the fact that all the biggest carbon emitters in the world are pointing nuclear weapons at each other right now: U.S., Russia, China, India, the European Union. So that's what we're going to put in our report.
All right, thank you so much. Patricia, did you have more to say, or?
Very brief. I was appalled to read in the local newspaper that our two senators to Washington and Neal both were lauding the fact that F-35s are coming to Barnes Air Force Base. And when those same technicians, many of them who work on those, could be building windmills in this state, but they were lauding it because of the economy, the benefits for the economy, as well as sort of pride in the state's capacity for research, MIT type research, technology research.
We've seen a lot of examples where a lot of local economies across the country depend on funding the military industrial complex, and that's definitely a very deep problem we need to address as well.
And that's exactly the kind of thing the commission is set up to do. Yeah. So the Massachusetts Commission would look at all those issues. How do we make this transition that we have to make?
This is a good segue to the peace economy bills.
It is an excellent segue. So Jonathan, why don't you take it from here, and can someone unpin us for?
Right. So as you've heard, the notion that one can address these issues without speaking to the fact that millions and millions of people are concerned about their employment and paying their mortgage and paying for their health care and their schooling, we have to keep both sides of it there. So it's not easy to address, but the first bill we're going to talk about focuses a little more on military and policing and the conflict of interest. And we're happy to have Rep. Erika Uyterhoeven from primarily Somerville. He's rapidly emerged as a leader in the state legislature. Talk about it, and then Jeff Klein also will fill in. Erika, you're on. Oh, you're driving. Don't talk while you're driving.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk, but I'll have my camera off if that's all right.
Yeah,
please. Drives us
Okay.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I figured that's why when I was trying to not accept the on video, and then I was like, oh, okay. But no, thank you all so much for having me, and I apologize, I'm a little triple book. I'm actually on my way driving to MCI Framingham, and so kind of related right to the military industrial complex that you all were just talking about. I believe that the prison industrial complex domestically here is intimately tied to just the profit making off of, the complete traumatization, terrorization of people abroad, people of color abroad and at home. So I just wanted to say thank you all so much for all of your work. But I'm here today to speak specifically on the bill around restricting, in terms of what we're able to accept as politicians from lobbyists. And so just to take a step back, we have actually pretty good laws. Of course, anything can be better, but in Massachusetts, there's a lot of really good restrictions in place that prevents money from influencing our decision. There's a whole ethics commission that prevents sort of the tit for tat type behavior. There is, limitations on what lobbyists can give us. So anyone who is a registered lobbyist can't give me as an elected official more than $50 a year of gifts and things like that, right? Because they're registered lobbyists. And there's just one loophole to all of that. And that's what my bill that I filed and previously had filed with Rep. Robinson on, which is to essentially say we need to close that loophole. It doesn't make sense that, I'm able to not accept, gifts greater than $50, but then I can have an all expense paid vacation and, hotel, airfare, I think the most prominent example of this is the trip to Israel. There are also other trips that I'll raise as well, right? We've seen tech companies give free trips to legislators and politicians just for a free trip to see Mountain View. Then at the same time, right, they're registered lobbyists and can push us to, one way or the other on what we want to legislate or fight for. And I think that's a real problem, particularly in terms of the influence of money in politics. I will be clear that, I do think that the money in politics issue is a really challenging one, because even with these regulations in place, it's so difficult because, of course, you have the revolving door, you have networks, you have people that, can say, is going to get more of our time and more of our attention and to influence our decisions. But, I think it's at least very important for a start. And I think, of course, preventing lobbyists from being able to give enormous gifts to legislators, as well as, of course, the campaign finance donation limit of $1,000. That's also extremely important. But there's more things we could be doing to really tighten up those laws and the influence of money in either the military industrial complex, in large corporations and corporate capture of our government. And of course, as I mentioned, the prison industrial complex is also one that leverages a ton of influence on us electeds. So happy to pass it over to my co-host, I believe, and answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you. Thank you, Rep. Uyterhoeven. Okay, on the same bill, let's move to Jeff Klein, who is one of the forces behind it.
Yeah, just to add, this bill only has 2 co-sponsors so far, and I hope that the other reps and senators that are on this call or have been will add their names to this bill. I mean, basically, it's a fairly obscure loophole to the strict limits on taking money from lobbyists, and the law is a little bit opaque. Basically, this bill would not stop reps and senators from taking part in educational and cultural travel financed by organizations which are not registered as lobbyists at the State House. Technically, the term is client. That is an organization which employs a lobbyist at the State House. Most of the international and national travel that reps undertake don't fall under this rubric. And we think education and cultural travel is perfectly legitimate as long as it's not at the behest of organizations which will then come to lobby for specific legislation at the State House. So what's covered is fairly restrictive. I know a lot of reps were nervous about this, reps who look forward to the ability and opportunity to do travel for educational purposes. That wouldn't be affected by this bill. To my mind, it's part of the move to make our state government more transparent and accountable to the public and less accountable to money. And as Erika said, the idea that a rep can't accept a dinner worth $50 from a lobbyist, but can accept a trip worth many thousands of dollars, and that this will have no effect in theory on their accessibility to the interests of that lobbyist who pays for the trip, frankly, it beggars belief. This issue first came to our attention, as Erika said, because one, if not the most frequent user of this loophole, are lobbyists that promote the interest of Israel in our state. You know, looking into the issue more broadly, there are other interests that pay for travel, like tech companies. Representatives went to a conference a couple of years ago on regulating tech companies, which was paid for by Google and Facebook, for example. Other reps went to conferences on regulating gaming industry, which is paid for by casino operators, for example. But our focus has been on the Israel trips, and dozens and dozens and dozens of members of our state house have been involved in these trips. And we think this is a clear conflict of interest that you know, should be stopped. As of now, in order to accept a trip from a lobbyist, members of the legislature only has to assert that it's in the public interest, and that's all, with no documentation of that. So we think this is an important bill, and we hope that it'll get more co-sponsors. Thank you, Representative Doherty, and a few others who have taken up this issue.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Rep. Erika. And we'll be on the lookout to add co-sponsors and to get support. Let me now move on to, I believe, is Rep. Doherty with us? Carol, are you here?
I can see me and you. Can you see me?
Very good. All right. So the next bill we'll talk about is the budget transparency and taxpayers' right to know. Carol is our representative from Taunton, following kind of in Senator Pacheco's footsteps to some extent. You may not know that she was a former president of the Mass Teachers Association. All right, Carol, you want to kick us off on
Yeah.
the taxpayers?
Just to connect with what you said about following in the senator's footsteps. When the senator first ran back in the day, he and I were opponents of the Democratic primary in that race. Once that was done, and he carried on for a few years, and then into the Senate, I stepped back for a little while. But here I am again. So thank you. By way of information, certainly Jonathan and I have known each other for that many years as well, meeting around the Jobs with Peace campaign. And Jonathan and company drew the Massachusetts Teachers Association into the Jobs with Peace campaign by adopting a resolution many, many years ago to support actions much like Mass Peace Action is initiating at this point. I don't know where the MTA is on creating resolutions and direction around this agenda, but it certainly is in the interest of education and educators to be able to do that on many pieces of the legislation that you are advocating. This particular bill, House number 3015, is a refile, modestly changed from last session's file. Last session, it was called an act providing federal and state budget information to residents of the Commonwealth, and it contained therein a requirement that, and when I get to tell you what this is all about, but it contained a requirement that information about the use of state and federal tax dollars would be mailed to each resident in the Commonwealth. And it was sent to the Joint Committee on State Administration and Regulatory Oversight. It happened that Senator Pacheco was chair of that committee in the last session. So we were fortunate enough for him to give a good advice for some changes in the bill. So it is now, with its new number, called an Act to Promote Budget Transparency, being very clear about what the intention of the bill is and the public's right to know. And that really, I think, is a better way of saying you've got to tell the people how their tax dollar is being spent. So I'm very much more comfortable with that title. And it's just clear and direct. There's no misinterpretation of what that is. The other change that Senator Pacheco, as chair of the Joint Committee, made was for us to try to make it cost-free to the Commonwealth to provide this information to people. And so simply changed one word from mail to website, so that the information would be put on the state's website at no cost, so that we would be moving away from that argument. Oh yeah, we'd love to do it, but printing and mailing is just an arduous task and very costly. So it was passed out of the committee with a favorable recommendation and did make it to Ways and Means as well. End of the session clips right along. And so here we are again talking about this bill. Very briefly, for those of you who may not know what it is, it's simply put, this bill says to our state treasurer, on the state's website, you must provide information to the Commonwealth's residents that will give them a sense of where both their federal and state tax dollar is going. The whole point being to have a better understanding among the populace that the vast majority of that dollar is fueling the military industrial complex, as has been pointed out, and not being dedicated to the discretionary spending, or the discretion that, particularly at the congressional level, that they have for housing, healthcare, education, and all of those domestic issues that we consider to be more important to the populace than the fueling the military industrial complex. Like you, I've heard the argument, but spending money on the military, as you've just pointed out about these planes, and the argument of our legislators at the federal level to say, well, this fuels the economy, it brings jobs forward, and more money is put back into the economy. But that's not the way in which we want our money to be spent. I think that the strategy that, at least that we have talked about with Jonathan particularly, is to pull in those other organizations like the Teachers Union, for example. What does the transparency in budget information and tax, the use of tax dollars, what does that do to the funding of education, for example? And I think about that, particularly education, because right now, the federal government, fiscal 23, the federal government spends 7.7, gives us back 7.7% of our state budget for education. The state pays 46% of that education funding, and the local dollar, the property tax dollar, 45.6%. So you can see, and that number, that little tiny minuscule sliver on a pie chart that the federal government pays for education alone is just so tiny and minuscule that it doesn't mean very much. And I think that we need to provide that information to our taxpayers so that there can be more of a better way, a better understanding of the kind of advocacy we need in order to fully fund the programs that we consider to be meaningful and important. So I'm, even though Senator Pacheco is not the chair of the Joint Committee any longer, I'm looking forward to a positive recommendation out of this committee. So I think it was September of 21 when the hearing on the bill was held last time. So we will all keep our eye on the time when that bill comes up for a hearing, and hopefully many of you will be able to provide a written testimony as well as oral testimony as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Rep. Doherty, for that excellent summary. I just can't resist adding, we're a week past tax day, April 15th, April 17th. Every American knows all about the IRS and paying taxes, not paying taxes, fear of being audited. But in the 100 years since the adoption of the federal income tax, no agency of the federal government has ever reported back to the taxpayers how much, where their money goes. And Carol and I and Senator Pacheco and many of us in Peace Action think if Americans knew that half the money they sent to the federal government was going to the war and war machinery, it would change their attitude. I'm not saying it would stop things, but it would change their attitude. All right, thank you very much. All right, our last peace economy bill deals the moral budget, the whole big picture. The Poor People's Campaign has introduced into the Congress articulation of a moral budget that would raise 140 million people out of poverty. And that's been transformed with the help of Rep. Livingstone into a budget bill for the a moral budget for Massachusetts. Jay, are you with us?
Jay Livingstone did not make it, and so I think you should explain about the bill.
All right. So the moral budget is an alternative budget compared to the one that Congress passes. The Congressional Progressive Caucus used to put in its own alternative budget. It was first called the Budget for All, then the People's Budget, but they've stopped doing that. So a couple of years ago, the Poor People's Campaign entered into the breach and put in a moral budget, which has a very different, hundreds of billions less for military, tens of billions more for housing, education, healthcare. And that's been transformed into a moral budget for Massachusetts, which also kind of sets up a commission which would examine what would it mean for the Massachusetts economy if the U.S. Congress passed the moral budget, right? So it's a way of doing public education around budget choices. Budget choices within the state are very, very obscure, but they're even more obscure in the federal budget. So again, this is part of the motion that Rep. Doherty talked about of making much more transparent what kind of choices are being made in the legislature, how our tax dollars are being spent both in the state and federally. And I hope that
actually Rep. Livingstone just arrived.
Hello, Jay, can we?
Yeah, sorry, I guess my camera is very blurry.
Okay. Yeah, it is. It is.
Looks like you're in a
why don't
fog.
you say a few words about the value of having a moral budget bill in the legislature? We can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and we can vaguely see you.
Sorry.
Looks like you're in a fog bank, Jay.
Yeah, it's I'm using my phone and it's the reverse camera angle on the phone. I need to clean it in some way.
The fog represents the moral fog of not being able to know the budget well enough.
Yeah. Yeah. So good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, I'm a little late. Distracted with some personal things. But I'm happy to file the moral budget bill again this term. Hopeful this term we can get it over the finish line. We were able to favorably move it the last two terms, and hopefully this is the one we get it. And what this bill does is it creates a commission to look at what would happen to Massachusetts if the federal government passed the moral budget, so that we could better advocate at the federal level for the moral budget, which would greatly enhance the social safety net and use money that's used for other purposes like the military to enhance the social safety net. And so my pitch in the legislature is that this bill really speaks to our values and shows us what kind of society we could have if we reprioritize federal spending.
People should know that when Mass Peace Action originally decided to get involved in budget issues. It was, I think, back in 2013, and then we were supporting the budget for all. Rep Livingstone was the person who came forward and brought forward the budget for all. And then when we went to the people's budget, and he has been a consistent fighter for, bringing some clarity and morality here. Okay, so that's for the peace economy. Let me turn it back to Glenn for our closing session.
Well, I don't
Actually,
think
it's
it's
over for
closing.
Alex.
Yes, Alec. Alec, are you with us?
Alex, yeah.
Yes, I am. Hi, thank you. Thank
Welcome.
you. I will say we are also, I think, about 12, 13 minutes ahead. We could probably open it up to questions, just a couple questions, one or two, right? If folks have any before we move on, we do have the time. So if anybody has questions for any of the people that we've just heard from on the peace economy issues, feel free to unmute yourself or write it down in the chat, and we can take those real quick. Otherwise, yes, we will move on.
Let's give a few seconds for any shy people that may be hesitant to type.
While we're waiting, obviously something like the budget transparency, that should be coming from the U.S. Congress, shouldn't be coming from a state. But we haven't been able to find champions in the U.S. Congress. So we're hoping that passing such a bill in Massachusetts, and then maybe over the next year or two, finding some supporters in a few other states to pass in those states budget transparency, taxpayers' right to know, we can build up enough muscle to find a champion, for example, somewhere in the Progressive Caucus, who will raise this in the U.S. Congress, because that's where it ought to be.
Going off of that point, a lot of bills that, state level bills tend to be sort of like, there's a whole theory about like, oh, state level bills are like laboratories of democracy where things can start. In practice, you might say they're laboratories of autocracy sometimes, but the idea is that like bills can start in the state house, and then once the federal level sees like, oh, that's a good idea, then it can go up to the federal level. But people underestimate just how much of an impact state legislation has on their lives.
And on that, because it seems like no one has any questions, and if you do feel free to throw them in the chat just as we're going along. I do want to re-emphasize the point that, oh, Richard, yes, you have a question before we move on. Are you able to unmute yourself, or do we need to? I don't know how the permissions work.
There he is.
Okay. Yeah, our whole congressional Congress people, year after year, they vote for the defense budget no matter what. And even when they add, I think the Defense Department added another 60 billion onto the 800 plus billion. But every one of our, both senators and every one of our Congress people, we're all Democrats, they keep voting for the budget. They never ask for a cutback. Maybe we should drop $100 billion off, and maybe we can use that $100 billion for these programs domestically. But I don't know. With Raytheon's got, is Raytheon part of the problem that we have in this state in particular?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me just say, it's because of the truth of what you're saying that some of us decided, well, we better retreat back to the state legislature, because we're certainly not making any progress in the U.S. Congress. So we're finding ways to raise the issue and maybe just expose what bad policy those votes are. But it's very frustrating, very discouraging, and you're absolutely right on. But we have to keep fighting.
I wholeheartedly agree, and just think that we need more people like you, Richard, speaking out to legislators and the public, saying that Americans aren't okay with giving the Pentagon hundreds of billions of dollars of raises when they can't even account for over 2 trillion of it. They've failed their own audits. And sometimes it is demoralizing, to put it lightly, but we just figure that if we ourselves aren't going to speak out against it, then there are plenty of corporate lobbyists that work for the defense industry that are more than happy to step into whatever void that we may leave. So we just have to keep speaking out, and if the federal level isn't where the momentum is, then we have to reallocate towards the state level and vice versa. That's what I'll have to say on that. Do we have any other questions that you see, Alec? Or
I just saw the one hand.
yeah.
I mean, I'll add a comment on this also, Cole Harrison. Actually, our two senators, Markey and Warren, and at least some of our reps, let's say Presley and McGovern, do vote to cut the Pentagon budget, but then they still vote to pass the whole thing after they lose the amendment. So they are, there is a section of progressive legislators that are trying to cut the Pentagon budget, but they're not willing to lie down on the tracks and say, if you don't cut it, we're not going to give you your money. So that kind of courage is what's needed.
I'll transition since it seems that we don't have any other questions, but still on that topic, there have been interesting studies that show that overall, not only elected officials, but even individuals, the public generally perceive the American people as being more conservative than they actually are. In terms of even saying I would vote for that, absolutely, but my neighbors wouldn't, right? My neighbors would never go for something like that, like reducing the Pentagon budget, when in reality that isn't true. So I think a lot of these politicians at the national level and the higher up they go through the ranks are more and more scared of what they perceive as being kind of potential backlash against standing out against the military budget or something like that. And the importance of acting at the local level is being able to show that, no, we can do this, right? We can stand up against the incredible amount of money that goes to the Pentagon. And there aren't going to be political ramifications for our local politicians because that is what the people want, right? And that gives permission to these kind of national politicians to see that they can do that too, right? And they can do that without facing the political ramifications that they think they're going to face. At least is my take on it. And I think, at least in that regard, we've already heard from a lot of people today in our first section about how that can happen, right? In terms of divesting from tobacco and a whole bunch of other issues, right? And the importance of the state legislature and local organizing in shaping that national consensus. So I think in a large way, it really can and does start right here in the state of Massachusetts. And that's my take. And with that, I will say thank you to all the speakers that have gone so far.
Jeff has his hand raised. I don't know if we still have a bit of time left.
Really quick. Yeah, Jeff.
So I just wanted to add that many of you may think that the consequences of this paid travel don't have an effect in the real world. The fact is that the same pro-Israel organizations that paid for these trips moved in 2017 to punish supporters of boycotting and divestment of Israel, which took an enormous amount of organizing to defeat at the state legislature. And as a kind of consolation prize, the next session, those same organizations asked for $500,000 to be appropriated to bolster Massachusetts-Israel trade relations. Israel is a very minor trading partner of Massachusetts. In the end, they passed $250,000 to promote Massachusetts-Israel, the only bill of any kind to promote foreign trade in the state legislature. It's not a huge amount of money, but still $250,000 could have been spent in other ways. And in the current legislature, there's a move to make as a statute a definition of anti-Semitism that would effectively punish criticism of Israel.
Yeah, and that's we're actually about to get
House 1558.
Jeff,
so the same organizations that pay for this thousands of dollars worth of travel are coming to lobby our legislators on bills that they're interested in. So it's a clear conflict of interest.
Well, all right, then that is a perfect segue anyway into that bill that you were talking about, which we are about to get into, which I will then just say that we are going to hand it over to, we've heard about the nuclear issues as well as how the state legislature can affect national policy. Of course, peace economy issues as well. And now we're going to get into some bills that MAPA opposes. So that does include the bill that Jeff just touched on, defining anti-Semitism. And to do that, we have Noble Larson, who is a member of MAPA's Palestine and Israel Working Group, as well as a member of the JAG coalition group working to oppose this bill. Noble Larson, are you with us?
Yes, thank you, Alec. The bill in question, H-1558, was submitted by Steve Howitt. He's a Republican rep from Seekonk, Mass. It's titled an act relative to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, and it would essentially define anti-Semitism as having the same meaning as endorsed by this International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. We'll call it the Ira definition. That's what it's popularly called by those of us who are working on it. It's similar to one of many similar efforts around the country to codify the Ira definition into statute. The definition is a highly controversial political tool. It was developed essentially, to my understanding, by the American Jewish Committee to counter and stop the widespread international criticism of Israel's violence against the Palestinians during the Second Intifada in 2000. The definition itself was drafted by the AJC's anti-Semitism expert, Kenneth Stern, in the early 2000s and was promoted within the IRA organization. Kenneth Stern, interestingly, has subsequently become a strong critic of the misuse of the definition, particularly on college campuses, and has testified before Congress to this effect, and has taken part in webinars on the issue as well. The definition in itself, there are two components to what we call the IRA definition. There's the definition literally, which is an innocuous, in a way, a kind of vacuous definition of anti-Semitism being a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Well, it's kind of defining it in terms of itself. And I don't think many would really object to that. Avi Shleim, the Israeli-British scholar, said that it fails to even meet the most elementary requirement of a definition, which is to define. So it's really not the problem in the definition. The problem is the examples that got added. And there were 11 examples that were basically, I think you would say, railroaded in a very problematical way. And these 11 examples, 4 of them were, I would say, non-controversial, but the remaining 7 are all about, one way or the other, about Israel. For example, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, for example, by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor, and like that. The definition has been widely criticized. For example, a scholar at Oxford, Jamie Stern-Viner, wrote a paper, I think 2 years ago, The Politics of a Definition, where he points out that Ira's decision-making body, the plenary, did not include any of the examples of anti-Semitism as part of its definition. There was no consensus within IRA for including the examples, and IRA, their decision process is, at least was, one of a consensus method. So there was no consensus to include the examples. Rather, what happened is afterwards, senior IRA officials, or some of them, and pro-Israel groups have misrepresented the plenary's decision in order to, as Stern-Viner put it, to smuggle into the working definition examples which can be used to protect Israel from criticism. The definition, the IRA definition, has been adopted by more than 30 states and many city councils around the U.S. Some of them, and occasionally is done as a proclamation. Governor Baker did that in January of last year. Proclamations aren't binding, so not too clear what those mean. Trump endorsed it in the U.S. In 2019 through an executive order. It's been adopted by the U.S. Department of State and also by the U.S. Department of Education, which is kind of a special concern. Excuse me. The definition, as per the Department of Education's use, has been used to silence Palestine solidarity efforts and educational programs on college campuses, targeting faculty, students at Fordham University, UC Berkeley, University of Minnesota, of Michigan, Columbia, UMass Amherst, and quite a few others. Events have been canceled accordingly, and similar incidents have happened in countries in Europe. So it's an international thing, I must add. So a campaign has been organized through the coalition effort involving MAPA, JVP, UU's for Justice in the Middle East, and the Alliance for Water Justice in Palestine, which we call the JAG. The JAG, I might mention, was organized back in 2016-17 to defeat the bill that Jeff mentioned a minute ago. That was the anti-BDS bill, and that was successfully blocked.
Ask you to wrap up pretty quick as well here.
Okay, Howard's bill does not mention the examples, but that is no consolation, because they will be brought in for sure, one way or the other. So the main arguments are that it's threatens free speech, and that it's really for shielding Israel from criticism. The bill has been assigned to the Joint Committee on the Judiciary, and there'll be a public hearing at some time, TBD. The current goal is to stop it in committee, that is to have it put out to study. That's about it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Noble, very much. And again, everybody and anybody who's interested in working on this bill, Noble, can you let them know how, other than, of course, signing up through the link that we'll have in the chat, how to get a hold of you or the group that you are working with this on?
I guess they could email me directly, but I would say just email to the MAPA general email address and ask to have it forwarded to the working group, to the Palestine-Israel working group. I'm sure that can be done.
Perfect. There we go. And again, the link is in the chat as well to sign up to work on any of these bills. And I'm sure someone might have posted it recently again, if it isn't already at the bottom of the chat. Noble, thank you very much. And next we are going to move on to Ed Hasbrook, who is an anti-draft organizer who himself has been jailed in the 1980s for refusing to register for the draft. Ed, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. I would like to talk to you briefly about two bills, which MAPA is, thank you very much, opposing, H3296 and S2281. These are identical bills on both sides of the general court that would, if enacted, enlist and deputize the Registry of Motor Vehicles to act as enforcers for the selective service system in getting young men to register for a possible military draft. And if it sounds weird to get the registry involved enforcing the federal draft law, well, it is weird. I want to talk a little bit about why this is happening and what's wrong with it. Why this is happening is because the feds are unable to enforce the law itself, and they are trying to get state governments enlisted to salvage a decades-old failed government program. I was the last person prosecuted in Massachusetts for refusing to register with the Selective Service System. That was in 1982. Nobody has been prosecuted anywhere in the country in more than 35 years. And they were only able to prosecute me because I'd spoken out publicly and they could use my public statements against me. At this point, compliance is very low. The former director of the Selective Service System testified at a National Commission hearing a couple of years ago that the current database would be less than useless for an actual draft. And so not having the resources to actually prosecute people. And people are supposed to not only register when they turn 18, but every time a man moves until they turn 26, they're supposed to notify the Selective Service System so they know where to find them if they want to draft them. Do you know anybody who has done that? No, of course not. So it's a completely failed program, but there hasn't been the political will in Congress to acknowledge that failure. So they're turning to the states, and many states, although many others have not, have gone along and have gotten this to made draft registration with the feds a condition of getting a driver's license, even though it has nothing to do with a driver's license. Massachusetts is not alone, although it's one of the larger states. It is joined in choosing not to get involved in this by New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California, the big one, Oregon, and a number of others. But what's wrong with this? I mean, if registration has failed and this isn't going to work, what's wrong with it aside from wasting money? One is that it's attempting to impose penalties on young men extrajudicially, without giving them any chance to present whatever defenses they might have against the legality of potential conscription for undeclared foreign wars, something that the General Court has been on record against for 50 years. And beyond that, I think there's an even more fundamental problem, which is the whole point of having the selective service system and a list of people which is perceived by military planners as showing that the draft is available as a fallback, a last-ditch fallback, but a fallback nonetheless, is that draft registration and the availability of a draft emboldens military planners to contemplate more aggressive, more expansive, larger, longer wars without having to think about whether the people would actually be willing to fight those wars. And as Daniel Ellsberg has said, when I asked him about this in an event a couple of years ago, the wars we've had without a draft have been bad, but they would have been even worse had there been a draft available and enacted. So taking draft registration off the tool, out of the toolbox, the arsenal of weaponry of the military, is an important way that we can constrain military planning. And we've talked a bit in this session about what can the state do, because the federal government has admitted that they depend on state driver's license agencies to enforce draft registration. This is a place where the state can actually wield power to constrain federal military policy. It's a good thing that Massachusetts has not got involved in having the registry enforce draft registration. That should continue. Oppose H3296 and S2281 or any attempt to insert that language into any omnibus bills, which may happen. Thank you.
Ed, thank you very much. Well, that concludes our speakers. So thank you to everyone who has spoken today. We now do have some time for questions. While people are raising their hands or writing their questions down in the chat, if they have any for any of the speakers that we've had today that might still be here, or about any of the bills, right, which we do, of course, have folks here no matter what who can answer those questions. Please do remember, again, it is imperative that we have the people power to be able to oppose these bills or support the bills we talked about previously. So go ahead and please do click on that link. Let us know what bills you're interested in working on, right, what you believe that you can do to help, and that will help us immensely in organizing around these bills going forward. I see, Jonathan, you have your hand up.
Well, I think that this last bill we just heard about is so connected to the peace action agenda that we ought to actually formally include it in our, legislative agenda, which requires a vote by our legislature. So, Ed, you should bring this to our legislative committee. Glenn Cody is the co-chair. There's a whole procedure. We're very careful about these kind of things. But I think this was...
Actually, I can update on this a little bit. We actually did have a struggle about this bill in the last session when they tried to attach it to as an amendment to a bill. And we actually formed a committee. We brought in both Ed, but also a couple of other national anti-draft advocates who are aware of this whole issue and gave us some advice, one of which, the group at that time felt it was the best strategy not to publicize our opposition to the bill until the other side made a move first. So at this time, both for this bill and for the anti-Semitism definition bill, MAPPA hasn't put anything on the website because we're waiting for the right moment. And even for the anti-Semitism, we're also working in coalition with JVP and others. But yes, we have, neither of these bills are new to MAPPA because we've had them in previous sessions in different flavors. So yes, we already have taken that position. Thanks.
Good.
Ed, you have your hand up. please.
Yeah, I just would note that at the federal level, there have been efforts. There was a bill introduced in the last two sessions of Congress to actually finally, after these decades of failure, repeal selective service registration and abolish the selective service system. That bill has been endorsed by National Peace Action, as well as the National Organization of Women, AFSC, Vets for Peace, et cetera, et cetera. We are looking, if anybody has federal legislative contacts, we're looking for sponsors to reintroduce that bill in a future Congress.
Good.
So we can just change back to gallery view so everybody can see each other, and we can change to more of an open discussion format now.
It looks like we still have 5 people pinned. I'm not sure how to unpin them. But...
Oh, okay. Let me unpin them.
Hey, Ed, I would make one comment myself. Having tangled with the draft myself many years ago, I do remember that in the 60s, it was the draft which really drove the anti-war movement. And when you don't have a draft, so many people just think it's not their problem. The working class folks it'll be drawn from that demographic. So I don't know. I'm kind of two minds in a sense.
Again, I think, what is most influential, one, many older people are willing to sacrifice young people's lives. It doesn't impact everybody. It only impacts the young. And the second thing, though, is the testimony that we heard, particularly at the National Commission that was looking into what to do about selective service, was so clear that they rely on the assumption that the draft is available as a pillar of their military planning, that really, I think it's very clear that getting rid of selective service would, kick one of the legs out from under those military plans and force some degree of assessment as to the degree of popular support. As basically, draft registration is a blank check for future wars, and military planners interpret it that way, I think.
Cole, is there anything else we should discuss before we remind people of all our wonderful events coming up?
I think if there's no more comments, we can do that reminder. Glenn.
Yes. So in the chat, you should see Cole just wrote some links that we have, but for the things that you should have on your schedule, the May 7th webinar on warheads to windmills, and the tentative date for our first anti-nuclear weapon lobby day is Tuesday, May 23rd. And you can sign up to get email reminders on that. And is there anything else that we should mention?
And most importantly, we'd like everyone here, please, to sign up on this form that I put in the chat, indicating your interest in working on this, indicating which bills are most important to you, one, and two, what kinds of things you are able to do to work for those bills. For example, will you contact your legislators? Will you attend a lobby day on May 23rd if it works out? Will you testify at the hearing? As you know, each bill will come up for a hearing at some point this year. And will you join a committee to plan the work on that bill? So that's what we're hoping you will volunteer to do by signing up.
Paul, I see Jay has his hand up.
Yeah, I fixed my camera. I just wanted to say hi to everyone in person, but also really thank you for this forum. Thanks for supporting my bill in particular, but also this has been very informative, not only for what the positive agenda, but also the bills that you have concerns about. And so I appreciate it. And, Cole just did the call to action for how much you're going to be involved. Legislators like myself definitely respond to our constituents. And so if whoever you represent, your senator, your your representative, definitely, I encourage you to reach out to them on the bills that you're most interested in and most concerned about, because that is going to make the biggest difference in their decision making. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and just to amplify that, we held an earlier session a couple of weeks ago with 3 experienced State House advocates, and they were loud and clear that to pass these bills, we've got to have people in every State House district contact their reps, right? Reps have a lot of bills on their table, thousands of bills. To get it, to pull it out of the pile, we have to have somebody, one of their constituents, contact that person. So we have to build our network across the state, and that's what this is about. Okay, end of sermon.
All right. Okay. So
go ahead, Jonathan.
Massachusetts is going to lead the way once again, as in the tobacco fight and the apartheid fight. And all of you are the frontline troops and need to recruit the cooks and the bottle washers that will come in behind.
Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.